Hello, everybody. This is John Fenn, and once again bringing you teaching about how the Lord heals us emotionally, how He heals our bruises, how He heals the memories of our past, the things that we carry along with us in our mind, in our emotions, and our memories. And this is part 2 of a 4-part series. And so where we left it off last week, bring it to memory, is that we're talking about the woman at the well. And at the woman at the well, Jesus brought up her past, that she had had 5 husbands, was now living with a 6th. And she ended up telling all the villagers, Jesus told me everything I ever did. And so obviously there was more of a conversation that went on between the 2 of them. But the net effect was this, the effect was this, that this woman had lived her life and she believed that was the truth. She was all alone, she was going by her strength, her power, she's going to push on through, she's going to make it. God doesn't care about her, God's not watching. And Jesus, when He told her everything she had ever done, Jesus is resetting her version of the truth. He is resetting her ideas about her life experiences. And that's what He does for us. He will go in there, and she had to, for instance, think that I always thought I was all alone when I buried my husband. And now Jesus is saying, no, I was there. I was aware of that, because the fact that Jesus knew all about her past and everything that had been there, she had to rethink that. You know, whereas she had thought before, I was all alone, God was not watching me, God doesn't care. What she had to rethink was, hold it, Jesus knew of this. Jesus was there, God was there watching me, and He's now brought me to healing. So that is one of the first things that you have to do, is realize that you've got to be willing to reset your version of the truth, your version of your own history, and realize and acknowledge God was there, God was watching. And He's brought you to the point right now, maybe even listening to my voice, bringing you to this point so that you can receive healing. And so that's what you have to look at. Now, the next thing is this. She told her whole village about Jesus. Now, the next step, once she understands the proper context, and this is what Jesus does, He sets the context of our history into His perspective, His truth. His truth is, I was there with you, I was there watching you, and I brought you to the place for healing. Now the woman has a decision to make. This is how Jesus brings us into healing. This woman now has to consider the fact that she is living with this man. Now that she's brought Jesus to herself, into her own life, and into the whole village. And like it said in John chapter 4, where our context has been John chapter 4, and in verse 42, they said, now we believe because we've heard Him for ourselves, not just because of what you told us. And we are convinced that He is the Christ, the Son of God. And so now she has a decision. She's a woman of some influence, obviously. She's well known throughout the whole village. The whole village practically comes to the Lord because of her. So now everybody knows that she's living with this 6th man. So she has a decision to make. Shall she continue to live with him? Shall she propose to him? Maybe she breaks off the relationship and he moves out, or she moves out. You see, when Jesus comes into our lives and He resets our past and we realize He was there, we were not alone like we thought, we were not abandoned like we supposed, but the Lord saw all that. And once we acknowledge that, when Jesus comes into that situation, then He brings us to the point of decision. What are we going to do now with Jesus in our lives? This woman had a decision to make. Was she going to propose to the man? Were they going to finally get married? Or what? Or was she going to break it off? Because Jesus is now asking her, now that Jesus is in her life, is asking her to deal with her hurts, to be honest with herself, and think about her hurts and her fears. Like I'd said at the first segment there, I proposed kind of a hypothetical situation that the fact was she'd been married 5 times. Perhaps she had buried 3 and divorced 2. Perhaps she had buried 4 and divorced once. Perhaps she was divorced 3 or 4 times and buried 1. We don't know the combination. We don't know what happened to her that caused her to be married 5 times. But it was clear that she did not want to be married to this 6th man. It was clear that she would prefer living with him instead of dealing with whatever led to that point of the relationship where she loved him, but she wasn't ready. to get married to him. And again, maybe because she had already buried 5 husbands or a few husbands, or maybe she'd been divorced all that time. But in one way or the other, they were content to live together. But now that Jesus comes into her life, she's got to learn to deal with the emotional elements of it. What is she going to do? Is she going to marry the guy or break it off? And a lot of times, see, we think as Christians, we think the Lord is going to give me the easiest way out. My experience has been the difficult decisions are where God is found. That's been my experience, that when I have a choice to make, the easy way out is usually not the Lord, because anything that the Lord asks us to do will involve growth. It will involve growing as a human being, growing with Christ in us. And so anything the Lord asks us to do will be challenging. It will be something which will cause us to grow. And so here he is now in her life. And it's interesting, notice Jesus just leaves the village. I mean, there's no record of Jesus ever going back to that village and helping her with her decision making. Now, today, it's kind of like a person gets born again, we start walking with the Lord, and we realize there are things that are not right in our situation. And maybe they're there, we have made some decisions because of the baggage from our past, because of our emotional bruises, because of the hurts that we've had, and we've made decisions. But now Jesus is asking us from the inside out, he's asking us to make difficult decisions. You know, will we continue with this relationship? Will we continue with this course of study? Will we continue with our hard feelings towards our father or our mother or our siblings? You know, and the Lord asks us one by one that he's in our life now to make decisions. Just like this woman, now that Jesus is there, now that Jesus has gotten the whole village saved through this woman, she's still living with this man. And now she has a decision to make. What is Jesus asking her to do? Let's look at another woman. Don't worry, we're going to talk about some guys too, but let's look at how Jesus brings healing to another woman. And this other woman is the woman caught in adultery. Again, don't think I'm picking on women only. It's just these are convenient scriptures for us right now, and there's some men as well that we'll look at. But this is the woman caught in adultery in John chapter 8. And the situation was that she had been caught, it says, in the very act of adultery, which means she'd been pulled out of bed, out of the relationship, out of the home of where she was with the man, and thrown into the street, and they were going to pick up stones and execute her right there. And Jesus intervened. And I want you to see, we're going to look at John chapter 8, and we're going to look at specifically verse 11. Now, verse 11, Jesus said 3 things to her. Number 1, he said, "Neither do I condemn you." Then he said, "Go." And then he said, "Sin no more." There were 3 elements to what he said. Now, this is just like the woman at the well. You're going to see the same pattern. In the same way that Jesus brought up the fact that when he said, "Call your husband," and she said, "I don't have a husband," then Jesus brought up the fact you've had 5, you're now living with the 6th. Here it is that this woman has been caught in adultery, and he acknowledges her situation. He acknowledged, just like the woman at the well, he acknowledges where she is and says, "Neither do I condemn you." Notice, it's just like the woman at the well. He did not make a judgment call and say, "You've had 5 husbands. What kind of a person are you that you can't stay married?" You know, he didn't make any opinion. He just acknowledged, "You've had 5 husbands. You're now living with the 6th. To this woman, he said, "Neither do I condemn you." So that's good that right now, wherever you are, know that the Lord acknowledges where you are. He's not making a judgment call. He's not expressing opinion, because the Lord is looking beyond. The Lord is looking after this event, that this is just history. This is just the baggage we've carried with us emotionally. This is just the bruises in our heart. This is the oppression in our mind that we're carrying with us. It does no good to condemn a person for past actions. So Jesus just acknowledges where she is. "I condemn you, neither do I condemn you." Then he said, "Go." And this word "go" means I'm free. So when he said "go" to this woman, she's, you know, you're talking about men who had stones that were ready to stone her. And it says in the context here in the verse, in the passage, that they just took off one by one, the oldest to the youngest, convicted of their own sin, until it was just Jesus and her alone. I mean, that's exactly what it says in verse 9. It was nobody but she and Jesus there. She's probably in the dirt. Maybe she's standing up by now. And they're just there alone. And so Jesus says, "Go." That acknowledgement that she is free, that "go" means I'm free. I can go. There's no accusers. But he carries with it the instruction, sin no more. And so this is where Jesus brings healing to this woman. First, he acknowledges where she is. I don't condemn you. Go means you are free. In other words, you are empowered. When he said go, and she's looking around and there are no more accusers, No one's around her anymore to kill her, to execute her. Jesus is saying, you are now empowered to make right decisions. You are now empowered to think right thoughts. And when he says, go, and the very next thing is, sin no more, Jesus is asking her to do some of the most difficult thing that she's ever done in her life. Let's speculate again, like we did with the woman at the well, and wonder, how did this woman end up in bed with this man? How did she end up with this affair with this man? Did she have a history of picking up married men? I mean, it was adultery because he was married. It's clear that he was married. Perhaps she was married. Either way, it's an adulterous affair. And so did she have a history of not honoring someone else's marriage covenant, either hers and her marriage or the man's and his marriage? Perhaps she was thinking something like, he was going to leave her, he's going to leave his wife and he's going to marry me. When Jesus said, go and sin no more, there were emotional ramifications. There were emotional consequences when he said, I don't condemn you. In other words, this is where you are. You're right here. Go, you are free. You are empowered to make right decisions. You are now empowered to make right decisions in life. And then he said, sin no more. And so that meant difficult emotional decisions. That now he is in her life, she has to think about breaking off the relationship. Because going and sinning no more means don't carry on with this adulterous relationship. She may have complained, oh, but I love him so much. And sometimes you have people come up in the prayer line talking about maybe they're in a similar case. You know, I've had situations and people come forward for prayer, men and women, and they know they're involved in an affair that's not right. And they'll say, oh, but I love them so much, and they're going to leave their spouse and come follow me. And they have all this emotional whatever going on. Jesus didn't ask her to rehearse all her emotions. He just said, go and sin no more. It's putting it in her responsibility. And this is the second point here. The first was that the Lord acknowledges where we are and then resets our context, resets the truth, that he acknowledges that he was there all along, seeing everything. And this is the next point, is that he asks us to deal with our emotions and take responsibility for our lives. He asks us to take responsibility for our thoughts and for our actions. When he said, go and sin no more, it meant that she had to break it off with that man, that she had to end the relationship. And not only that relationship, but she had to break a pattern in her life of evidently, depending on men for her perhaps self-esteem or whatever the case was, that she would go to carry on an affair with a married man. So perhaps she was thinking, in that day and age, perhaps she was thinking, but he's supplying me an apartment. He's giving me a living expense, a living allowance. If I break it off with him, then where am I going to live? How am I going to earn a living? She had to deal with the fact that her secret affair with this man was now public. She was brought out into the street for everybody to see that was walking around, going to their stores, going to their work, walking the streets, and there's a woman, she's about to be publicly executed. So now her affair has been made public. So she has a reputation that has been damaged. The secret that she'd carried with her is now brought to light. And Jesus still says, go and sin no more. So she has to rebuild her reputation, rebuild her life. She has to cut off the relationship. This is the difficult emotional element that Jesus does to us to bring us healing. It would be so nice if he would just touch us on our head and say, be healed of your lust, be healed of your need to have a man in your life to fulfill your self-image, to think that maybe he will provide for you and he will love you completely unconditionally. He doesn't just tap us on the head and say, be healed of all this. He helps us, he comes into the situation, he acknowledges where we are, He frees us up and says, now I empower you to live a right life. And then he places that parameter, go and sin no more. And so this is the kind of thing that she had to deal with. And this is a real person. And just like the woman at the well, these are real people going through real emotions. This woman had to break off that relationship. And so this is a way that the Lord brings healing, is to help us walk through difficult circumstances. See, right now you may be in a situation that's causing you great pain. Maybe it's your brother or your sister that has caused you great pain, and you want to be reconciled to them. And the thought of going to them, and Jesus is empowering you to go to them and make peace, or at least maybe he's just telling you to forgive them for all the hurt that they've caused. See, when he comes into your situation, the first thing he does is acknowledge where you are. Meaning What that means is he will bring it up to you. He will bring that issue to the surface in your mind, in your memory. And then he will say, go. That is, you are now free. You are now empowered. And when he says sin no more, that means he's dealing with you, let's say in this case, for unforgiveness, for bitterness, because of what your sibling had done to you. And so he's going to deal with you and empower you. So you may have to make the first step. In my life, it was pretty interesting because I had struggled for 10 years to forgive my father when he left our family when I was about 11 and a half years old. And when I was 16 years old and I came to the Lord, I made the decision to forgive him. And I realized when Jesus said in Mark chapter 11, verses 25 and 26, in Mark 11:25, he said, as you stand praying, forgive. And I realized that that command, as you stand praying, forgive, that Jesus was saying forgiveness is a decision, not an emotion. If you wait for your emotions before you feel like you've forgiven, you'll be on a treadmill. You'll be on a continuous loop where you'll just cycle through the same feelings and the same hurt and everything else. But realize in Mark 11:25, Jesus said, as you stand praying, forgive, which means forgiveness is a decision. The emotions will follow sometimes years later, but the actual decision to forgive is just a decision. So when I was 16, I made the decision to forgive my father. Now, it took me 10 years to the age when I was 26 years old before I worked through the injustice of him leaving our family, all the hurt he caused, all the hurt he'd caused my brothers and my sister, my mother, etc. I worked through all those events, all those traumatic things that I had, all those memories I had in the past. And frankly, when I was 11, 12 years old, my dad had left 13, 14, I gave up on the world. I didn't care. I started flunking in school. You know, I would start a project, I would start a hobby, I would pursue something, and then I would end it. I just had no drive, no desire at all. I was bruised emotionally. I was that barely lit lamp. And so, you know, life goes on. You know, marry, have children. 10 years goes by between age 16 and age 26. And each time the memory would come up of some event, as soon as it would come up, I would say, that's not the devil, that's God bringing it up to heal me. He's acknowledging where I am, and he's now empowering me to live what's right. And now I have to make the difficult decision to stick by my decision to forgive. And so the memory would come up, and I'd work through the injustice and make me angry all over again. And I'd say, no, but I forgive. I forgave him back when I was 16. I forgave him. And so it's like the Lord would bring up event after event after event in my life. And when he would do that, I would just say, I forgive, until all the events that had happened to me when I was a teenager and young man, all the events had been worked through. And you know what he had me do? I mean, the very last thing when I realized, the last part of it was that I realized my teenage years were missing. I didn't have any teenage years with my father like all my friends did. And it made me angry that I did not have any teenage years with my father. And once I forgave and once I came to peace with that, it was like the memory was there, but the pain was not. The memory remained, but the pain was gone. And that's what happens when the Lord brings emotional healing. This is how you know you have been healed emotionally, is when the memory remains, but there's no more pain. And so once the memory is there and there's no more pain and you know you've been healed, then don't bring it up again. You know, if you want to remember it, that's fine. If something reminds you of an event, that's fine. But once the memory is there, but the pain is no longer, and you know you've been healed, then don't dredge it up and relive all those hurts. Let the healing of the Lord, the fact that he's left the memory but removed the pain, let that be a continuous, abiding work in your heart. And you know what the Lord had me do at 26 years old? It was Christmas time, and I heard the Father speak to me and say this. He said, call your dad. He said, I want you to call your dad and ask him to forgive you. And at first I was taken aback. It's like, me? Ask him to forgive me? For what? What did I ever do? And, you know, it's like, I'm a kid. He's the one who left our family, you know, when all that happened. And yet it was just with me. It just continued. Call your dad, call your dad. Hadn't talked to him in years, but I still had his phone number. I called him up. I said, Dad, hi, this is John. He said, yes. I said, Dad, would you forgive me if I said or did anything to hurt you or cause you, hurt? Please forgive me. And there's silence on the other line. Seconds of silence. I was getting uncomfortable. Finally, I said, well, do you? Will you? And he went, very well. Oh, it was like a weight lifted off of me. I said, good, thank you. Well, how are you doing? I hope you're having a good Christmas. Fine, very good. And I was like nervous. It's like I wanted to get off the phone as quickly as possible. It's like, okay. Oh, well, have a good Christmas, Dad. Thanks. Bye. Click. That was the last time I spoke to him as far as I can remember. No, there was one other time I spoke to him because he didn't want to be part of our lives. So this was me taking the initiative there. But you know what? The memories are there, but the pain's gone. And I wonder with this woman caught in adultery, I wonder with the woman at the well, that when the Lord comes into their lives and he acknowledges where they are, then he resets that perspective like I did. I realized that before I knew the Lord was seeing all the things that were going on, and he saw that my dad left. He saw all that, and that I was not alone as I had supposed. And I had to reset my thinking about my childhood, that the Lord was really there. He was watching and he was with me. And once I reset that, I realized I'm empowered now to make right decisions. I'm empowered now to forgive. I'm empowered now to move beyond the hurt. And decision by event and after event, work through the injustice, work through the hurt, work through the fact that it just was not right, it was not fair, and work through that over the course of time. And that's what I'm telling you, the reason we don't see the Lord just touching somebody on the head and say, zap, you're healed emotionally, is because like the woman at the well, and like this woman caught in adultery, it's going to take time. It takes time to process all the damage that hurt us, in our childhood, in our teenage years, in our past, mistakes that we've made and things that people have done to us. And so as we forgive ourselves, as we work through that, then healing comes. It's that we are empowered to make right decisions. And we don't like to hear that Jesus asks people to make difficult decisions. Both women here had to make difficult decisions about relationships in their lives. And what were they going to do now that Jesus had entered their life? When Jesus said, go and sin no more to this woman caught in adultery, think about the emotional attachments she had to that man, and perhaps financial attachments if he was providing an apartment to her. Perhaps she was thinking, that he's going to leave his wife and come and marry her. Whatever she was thinking, it was a difficult emotional event for her to put through that, to go through that, and yet she had to do that with Jesus now in her life. Now, there's another man. I mean, we could talk about several of them. One of them, for instance, is in Mark chapter 1. And it's a man with a withered arm. You thought I was going to leave the guys out, didn't you? No. In Mark chapter 1, there is a man with a withered arm. Or excuse me, Mark chapter 3, I apologize. It's Mark chapter 3. In Mark chapter 3, there's a man with a withered arm. And it's verses 1 through 6. And the situation that Jesus is teaching, and he asks the leaders there about the Sabbath. And he says, is it okay to do good on the Sabbath? And they would not answer him. And he said, well, if your livestock falls into a pit, aren't you going to work to get that animal out even if it's a Sabbath? He said, so is it okay if I heal this man with a withered arm? And Jesus said, stretch forth your arm, and it was restored whole as the other. And that was an important thing. It was restored whole as the other. The man with a withered arm, this is an injury. This is a work injury. We don't know what it was, but he was not born that way. Usually with the people that Jesus healed, if they were born in a condition, it tells us that. Or it tells us a long time, like a lame man later in the Gospel of John. It says he was in that condition for 38 years. And like in Acts chapter 14, verses 8 and 9, there was a man who was crippled from his mother's womb who had never walked. So the writers of the New Testament were good about telling us all the details. So the fact that this man just had a withered arm, but there's no time frame put to it, tells us it was an injury, probably at work. Maybe an animal kicked him and did nerve damage. A withered arm, what we would say today is the word atrophy. That is where the arm is immobile because of damage and the muscles shrink back. Now think about this man. Perhaps he had lost his job, most certainly. He probably did it, like I said, at work. Perhaps some bricks fell on him. Maybe an animal kicked him. We don't know what caused this arm to be withered, but there was obviously damage. And if you can't use your arm, you can't work. So he was very handicapped, very limited in that. And the Lord healed him. Well, think about the difficult decision. Again, we see the pattern. The Lord acknowledged where he was, and then he comes into his life, and he heals the man. That healing empowers the man to go and make right decisions. I had a man come forward for prayer one time, and he had it for a back injury. But he was very honest with me, and he said this. He said, I'd like prayer for my back because I'm a Christian, and I think it's the thing to do that I need to ask for healing. He said, but to be real honest, I get a check from the government every month. I'm on disability, and I like my free time. It's kind of like I'm close to retirement age. I like to go fishing, and I don't know that I really want to be healed because if Jesus heals me, I'm going to have to go back to work. You see, that was the emotional trauma that he would have to deal with. That's the bruising that he would have to deal with. Does he live with the pain of his disability, but he enjoys his free time? He enjoys that check from the government. Every month he likes to go fishing and he likes spending that time, but he felt like he's obligated to come forward and say, okay, could you pray for me that the Lord would heal me? And it's like, and I told him, I said, well, the Lord's not going to heal you until you decide whether you really want to be healed or not. You know, you have to decide the emotional element there. Are you ready to go back to work? And he said, well, no, I'm not. And I said, well, I'm going to pray for you that the Lord will bless you and perhaps give you some things to do where you can be a blessing to other people instead of living just a self-centered life. And maybe you can, with your free time and everything, you could help people in ministry or help someone who needs you, needs things in life, you know, food, transportation, etc. And that's like the man with the withered arm. Now he's got to go back to work. He's healed now. He's got to go back to work. He has to deal with that. Maybe get his old job back. See, whenever Jesus comes into our life, there is a decision to be made. There's emotional things. There are emotional things to deal with. And then he sets us in the new direction. He sets us off in the next direction. And in the next segment, in segment number 3, I want to talk about how we actually process that in our brain, how we think those thoughts. What are some good examples of how we might go back you know, into our emotions and the baggage, the bruising that we have, and say, how can we make right decisions? The Lord will touch you where you are, and he'll touch you right now to give you a point where he enters your life, but then he will leave you with decisions. So I'm going to pray for you right now, and I'm going to pray that he touches you and then shows you those decisions you've got to make. So Father, in the name of Jesus right now, I pray for those watching that as you touch them in the heart, as you bring this revelation to them, it is also the empowerment to go to the next season of their life, to make the right decisions. And I ask that you strengthen them and encourage them in you to do this, Father God. I thank you for doing it. I thank you that they can feel your presence and your spirit now. In Jesus' name, amen. Hi, everybody. This is John Fenn here once again at TV7, and I encourage you to partner with us, to be a part of the ministry, part of the fellowship of bringing this tremendous programming to Christians and the unsaved alike. You know, Paul had a time in his ministry where he was talking about in 2 Corinthians chapter 8, they were so eager to join with him in the ministry because they recognized they were partners in what he was doing. And an angel told the Roman centurion Cornelius in Acts 10:3 that his offerings had come up as a memorial before God. I'm telling you, when your gifts and your donations leave your hands, it doesn't stay here on the earth. In some way, God recognizes that and causes that to be a memorial before him. What an exciting thing to do, to be able to live our lives and to affect untold thousands of people by your giving. So I ask that you would join with us right now. The information is on your screen. It is so worthy, and I'm telling you, it's got an eternal weight, an eternal benefit to join with us in the ministry and the fellowship to the saints. God bless you for doing that. Thank you.